For my class project, I chose to talk about the dysfunctional brain and how it relates to human behavior. Now, as a newer criminal justice student, this topic really interests me because before this I was studying psychology during my AA, and this really caught my attention because, I've always been interested in the human behavior. And really, one question that criminologists often ask is, why do some people commit crimes while others don't? And even when they may even come from similar backgrounds. Now, I find this very fascinating. So when most people think about crime, they think about poverty, peer pressure, family issues, right? Trauma, personal choices. And they think about all these things. And all of those factors are important. However, criminologists have also studied whether biology, environment, even the brain can influence behavior, right? Now, this idea is known as dysfunctional brain theory, which I think there's so many levels to it that you could go down these rabbit holes, but I'll stay at the top, right? So in simple terms, the biosocial perspective looks at both biological and social influences when trying to understand criminal behavior. Now, there's many caveats here, right? This theory does not just say that someone is automatically a criminal because they have a brain injury or a neurological issue, right? But instead, it suggests that problems with brain development or brain function may increase certain risks, such as impulsive behavior, aggression, poor decision, knee-jerk reaction making, right? That some people do and they just don't think about it. So one of the most important areas of the brain that I want to talk about today is the frontal lobe. Now, the frontal lobe helps control decision making, planning, judgment, reasoning, impulse control. So, in other words, it's part of the brain that helps us stop and think before we act, right? So, for instance, you could be out driving in the traffic, right on the road, in traffic, and somebody cuts you off. You might get annoyed, but you stay controlled, right? And you just kind of move on. Well, the frontal lobe helps with that self-control. Now, let's look at it this way. If this area of the brain is damaged or not functioning properly, a person may struggle to control their anger, think through consequences, make rational decisions, right? They may react before thinking, and we see this a lot of times on the news, right? And so we have to look at those aspects as well. Now, again, this is not an excuse criminal behavior. I'm not saying that. But it also may help explain why some individuals are more impulsive or aggressive than others. Now, that's just one piece of it. Now, another important topic is, traumatic brain injury, often called TBI. Now, there's so many things that can happen here. Now, traumatic brain injuries can happen from car accidents, sports injuries, falls, military combat, physical violence, right? Now, research have found that the brain injuries can sometimes affect personality, emotional regulation, and behavior. Now, there's so many stories that I could go down, but I'll stay here, okay? I'll be calm because I love this stuff and I get excited about it. Now, a person who was once calm and responsible may become impulsive during these, brain injuries, right? Aggressive, maybe even reckless after, suffering types of brain injuries or serious brain injuries, brain trauma. And I find this fascinating because it reminds us that behavior is often complicated, right? And it's more complicated than just a simple labeling of someone as a good person or a bad person, right? So it's not just always black and white like this. Now, mental health also connects to this discussion. Now, there's so many things we could go down this way as well, but certain neurological disorders or brain dysfunctions may affect emotional stability. And I see that because we can go through trauma or stress, right? Now, it can also affect judgment and behavior too. So it's important to understand that having a mental illness does not mean that someone may become or is a criminal. In fact, most people with mental illness, conditions never commit crimes at all. So we have to look at it that way as well. Now, however, criminologists still study whether certain biological conditions may contribute to criminal behavior in some situations, right? One reason is that the topic interests me so much is because it really raises a very important question for the criminal justice system. That's why I wanted to talk about this dysfunctional brain. Now, should punishment always be the answer? This is questions that I've asked myself. Or should treatment and rehabilitation also play a role? Now, I think that it's kind of both, right? Now, for an example, like if a person has a documented brain injury that affects impulsive control, Should the courts take that into consideration when determining responsibility or sentencing? It's a really tough call. Now, because you're not just looking at the person, you're looking at the other people that were affected by the person's actions, right? Or decisions. So there's no easy answer for these questions, but there are important questions for criminal justice professionals to think about, right? At the same time, I do not believe biology alone explains full criminal behavior. Because you can think about all the caveats from biology, but you can also look at environment. Because I think, to me, environment still, matters a great deal in this situation, right? Such as family life, childhood trauma, education, poverty, peer pressures or peer groups, substance abuse, personal choices. All these things are influential factors. And in reality, criminal behavior is usually the result of multiple factors working together rather than a single cause. Now, that is why I think the dysfunctional brain theory is best viewed as one piece of a larger puzzle, because there's so many pieces there, right? And to me, when we're looking at each piece, we can break it down even further. And so you try to stay level in this conversation. So in conclusion, the topic taught me that criminology is much more complex than just simple deciding whether someone is good or bad. Because human behavior is influenced by biology, environment, experiences, personal decisions, things that they're going through. And by studying the brain and understanding how it affects behavior, criminal justice professionals can make more informed decisions about, preventions, treatments, rehabilitation, and most importantly, public safety.